Good morning. It's Wednesday the 8th of September 2021 and it's time for a DaviePHD's Indy vlog one-off special. Today we're exploring why the Tories are trying to disenfranchise poor people. We should all value our ability to take part in free and fair elections, and we should all be able to have the confidence that our democratic processes are fair and robust. But the UK Tory government are seeking to get in the way of that. Future UK elections will not be free and fair because Boris Johnson doesn't want them to be. At the moment, a voter attending a polling station has to give their name and address to a polling clerk who will then cross them off a list, give them a ballot paper so they can vote. A nice, simple process which works well. However, after 2023, voters will have to produce photographic ID at the polling station. Now, our Tory chums would have us believe that this is an attempt to stop the scourge of voter fraud. So let's look at how big a problem voter fraud really is. The last UkKwide election was the UK general election in 2019. There were 47.5 million registered voters. There were 32.1 million votes cast. There were 164 cases of voter fraud reported. 4 resulted in convictions, 4 resulted in other outcomes, 3 resulted in court action which was lost, and 2 resulted in police cautions. Now, the original cost of the voter ID programme was estimated at £20 million. But a Cabinet Office impact assessment has come to light that includes estimates that voter ID will cost between £65 and £180 million over the next 10 years, with a central estimate of £120 million. So it seems that the £20 million cost per general election we were expecting was just the start for this policy. The £120 million central estimate includes £55 million on detailed polling cards, which will have to change size from A5 to A4 and be posted in envelopes for the first time. £20 million in staff over the decade, as extra admin means 19,851 more polling clerks will be needed on election days across the United Kingdom. £20 million on communications. £9 million will be needed just for the Electoral Commission. £7 million will be needed for training, and £2 million will be needed for printers, like equipment like printers and webcams. Now, democracy is mathematics at the end of the day. So let's do some simple percentages based on those figures. Just 0.0005% of votes cast were reported as potential voter fraud. That's 5 in a million. Just 0.00012% of votes cast resulted in voter fraud convictions. That is 1 in 12 million. If we were to take the £120 million central estimate as the price tag for this scheme, then Boris Johnson is happy to spend £731,707.31 to prevent each reported case of voter fraud, or a frankly staggering £30 million on each conviction. Now, when a public prosecutor is considering whether to prosecute a criminal, they have to determine whether or not it is in the public interest to proceed with the case. If it was going to cost the Crown £30 million to secure a conviction for a single voter electoral fraud, there's no way the case would come to court. And when you conclude that it could never be in the public interest to spend an obscene £120 million on just 4 convictions, we can only conclude that this programme is not being pursued in the public interest of electoral security. So why is it being pursued? Well, other figures from the Electoral Commission also reveal that 3.5 million voting age people in the UK don't have any form of photographic identification. The reasons for this vary, but the most common reason is poverty. If you're struggling to make ends meet, perhaps relying on the local food bank for help to feed your family, then you likely won't have a passport, as a foreign holiday is out of reach. And you may not apply for a driver's licence, as lessons and cars are expensive items that may be out of your reach. So if your disposable income is low and you are asked to fork out for a form of ID, but you have hungry mouths to feed at home, what are you going to do? Are you going to get that ID? Are you going to feed your kids? Is that really a choice? Now, when you consider that the 3.5 million voters referred to are unlikely to vote for the party which has done so much to keep them there, and now consider that £120 million price tag against this cohort of 3.5 million potential voters, it comes out at a much more reasonable £34.29 to disenfranchise each one of these voters. When a government seeks to sideline our elected representatives by lying to the Queen, illegally closing Parliament, it is clear they have no problem with suppressing democracy when it suits them to achieve their aims. And when you consider the infinitesimally small amount of suspected electoral fraud cases and the even more minuscule amount of convictions, it's clear spending 120 million quid of our money to prevent it isn't in the public interest. The only interests served by this democratic outrage are those of Boris Johnson, his government, his party, and perhaps more importantly, their donors. Now, I generally like to finish these videos in a positive, but in this case it's difficult to do that. This bill represents the Tories' staggeringly warped priorities and will only serve to silence poor voters. It also demonstrates the rank hypocrisy of Boris Johnson himself. In 2004, he wrote this on the subject of ID cards when it was being mooted by the Tony Blair government. If I am ever asked on the streets of London or in any other venue, public or private, to produce my ID card as evidence that I am who I say I am, when I have done nothing wrong, when I am simply ambling along and breathing God's fresh air like any other freeborn Englishman, then I will take that card out of my wallet and physically eat it in the presence of whatever emanation of the state has demanded that I produce it. Now, unfortunately, that same rank hypocrite now has an 80-seat majority in Parliament, so that he can practice the rank hypocrisy we have come to expect from him and his government with impunity. They can wield that majority like a battle axe to enable that rank hypocrisy, so I'm afraid resistance to this one may be futile. The UK government have already disregarded one petition of well over 1 million signatures on this issue, so I fear civic resistance may be a lost cause too. The only advice I can sadly offer is to get some form of identification. The cheapest currently available is the UK Citizen Card. Now, this can be used to board internal flights, as ID for the Department of Work and Pensions, so it will be acceptable as voter ID. It costs £15. Now, I know that £15 is a lot for some of us to part with, but if you can save a quid a week, you'll have it in a few months. And I know this next bit is difficult, it's potentially humiliating, but women threw themselves under racehorses for the right to vote, and so many people around the world still don't have the right that we take for granted. It is that important. So if you need help to afford one of these cards, and please ask someone who can help you. If you know me and need help, please ask me. And if you know someone in poverty and can afford to help them, then please do. Please give them the money and help them to get this ID in place before the next round of elections. Hopefully, we in Scotland won't be taking part in the next UK general election. But for those who inevitably will be, when that UK general election come around, remember that the Tories try to disenfranchise you. Remember that they try to suppress your sovereign right to vote. Remember the hardship they put you through to get that identification. So take that identification, show it to the clerk, get your ballot paper and vote them out of office. Folks, thanks for watching. Feel free to share this video with anyone you like. This needs to go way beyond the independence bubble, folks, so share it far and wide across the UK. Cheers, DaviePHD.